what motivated you originally to become an artist, and what path did you travel towards it?
Well, I'd say in my case, it started fairly early on, and as I can remember doing drawings when I was pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
Even I remember tracing comics with pieces of I guess they were like what is that blue paper called? Like a carbon paper. I still remember using carbon paper and tracing comics out of the newspaper, but that was one thing. And I loved to draw as a kid too. It was just, I was kind of a little bit obsessed, I guess, but that carried on all through even high school. And I remember really liking the idea of making painting. I don't think in the beginning I even knew that it was a profession, or that one could make a living doing it. I'm still not sure about that, but anyway, it was something I was drawn to early on, and then I was actually at one point living in Whitehorse. I think I was 19 at the time, and I saw I think it was a Time magazine, Time Canada, maybe it was Maclean's. There was an article about Graham Coftry coming back from Ibiza, and he was going to be teaching at I think they got the name of the school all wrong. I decided to just move to Toronto. I think I hitchhiked back to Toronto, and I enrolled. I wanted to enroll at OCA at the time, but it was full, or it was September, so I couldn't get in. And I looked up art schools in the phone book. I found the New School of Art, or the three schools, I think. And someone told me that there were full-time classes, so I signed up. And I think it was about, maybe 2 months later, I realized that, and I was actually in his studio. I was in Graham's studio. He took our class to the studio, and I realized this was the same guy who kind of inspired me to move to Toronto and take up art, or go to art school at least. So in a funny kind of way, it all came around. It kind of completed itself somehow.
That's pretty funny. In all of this, Rob, I don't know about you, but one of the questions that has forever been in my mind, and I usually find different answers to it, is so what does an artist do, or what is an artist? What can an artist actually contribute? What's an artist's role, really? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think about that quite a bit, and I'm not sure there's any easy answer to that. But I think an artist should have a role. There is a role. There's a need for artists, but that's just a real difficult one to fulfill. I don't know if I can say exactly what an artist's role is, but I think for me, I keep thinking a lot about observation and that's maybe the starting point of what an artist does, and that's maybe the most important thing in when I look at my own work and try to determine what it is I'm doing. I think that's at least the beginning, and then it moves on from there.
Which leads me perhaps to another difficult question. Your practice has gone through a number of iterations, but through all those iterations, one senses a particular determination. And I guess it's always another teasing question is how does one identify, without there being any kind of didactic direction, identify the practice that an artist has, that's something that seems to pervade their practice as they move through it. So I'm kind of curious if you've got any thoughts about what might pervade the practice, what might be its core idea, you might say, that seems to move through year after year the work that you do.
Well, I think it almost seems like there needs to be, or maybe there needs to be a feeling that something is necessary, that something necessarily must be done, or something necessarily must be accomplished. And I think that's, again, maybe that goes with observation. After having observed something, then it's important to somehow try and analyze it and come to some further conclusion. Not just leave it as it is, or maybe leave it as it is. I'm not sure, but I think in all of this, there's a. I think for an artist, I think it's important to find subject matter that engages them somehow and kind of necessitates their making a certain kind of work. If otherwise maybe it's better not to do it. It's I sometimes think, does the world need more objects? and if that really is a concern, then maybe it's important to really concentrate on what is important and if it needs doing, then do it.
You're being quoted as saying, "It's my attempt to make something that's real, though I also know it falls short."
Yes, well, I think a number of works have engaged, I'd say, with realism as I see it, with an attempt to somehow record what is there in the world, and at the same time I acknowledge that I'd say that's true of any of the work I've done on paper. It's especially it is a depiction. It's a different thing than the thing itself, even though there's always an attempt to really actually come very close. When I think about these, say even the work here, this pine, it's done size as, so the scale is 1:1, and that's an aspect of trying to, kind of very literally, a kind of pig-headed literalism of trying to do something one-on-one, but, at the same time, always feeling that the work is something different. It's not the same thing. It's, as a depiction, it's become another reality unto itself.
In fact, in C Magazine, John Armstrong wrote that without any didactic tone, these paintings chronicle a simultaneously grim and poetic politic. What do you think about that? Grim and poetic politic.
Yeah. Well, I think he's referring in that case to some of these works here again. That was a group of some of the first pine paintings. They were paintings that I did on a trip to Temagami. I was invited to go up with a group of people. I took a camera along and photographed the bark of various red and white pine trees, and with the intention of coming back to the studio and then doing these long paintings. So I kind of had an idea. I'd done one or two paintings already like that, and I think in terms of what John is referencing there was the fact that in many ways this group too was going there to make a statement about that old growth forest in Temagami. So I think that may be the very the thing he's referring to. It's those trees are, I would say, more protected now. There are certain areas of that area around Lake Temagami that are being logged now, but for the most part, the old growth forest areas are protected. But for many years there was a logging road that went right into the heart of that forest, and there's only really small pockets of it where you could find, say, 300 or 400-year-old trees that are in a context of what you'd really call an old growth forest with that certain kind of vegetation all around it. It's a kind of a unique example of something that is really quite special and not often seen.
When I think of the work, the series actually, but the work that is here in the studio behind you, I'm struck by the fact that it is a very close-up, one-to-one relationship that we have to the tree. But it's also a kind of taxonomy because you haven't provided the entire tree, it's just that section, almost like a litmus test of the tree. And I'm curious about that.
Yeah, well, I think, I sort of see it as a kind of a window. And again, I think this is where I realize the limitations of the picture itself, and every picture has its limitations. So I think it's important to know those and to maybe mark them out as soon as one starts. It's in the case of each of these, I sort of saw it as a kind of sliver or a window into that world, and I tried to indicate too that there really is, I mean, you really are seeing only a very small slice of it.
Much earlier in your practice, Rob, and I remember it quite well, you were doing large sculpture installations, and you were depicting fragments, as I recall, fragments of heroic stuff, monuments or whatnot, moving forward years later, we have Desert Storm and Little Boy. I wonder how you understand the mode by which you move from one work or one part of your practice to another, and how you manage that, or how you see it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I suppose. Yeah, that work went through a number of phases. There was a phase that was completely narrative. Well, it included narration in the work, so that was early on, and eventually I moved into works that contained fragments, and I think fragments have always been a kind of some sort of a concern of mine, or even that notion we were talking about that dealt with framing, or the window into an aspect of something. The fragments I made were often also cropped in a kind of similar way. They often were just a very flat, sharp cut, almost as if they had been part of a picture or something that just was cropped. So cropping became a thing that's continued on in the work, I think. But there were also works that dealt with scale models of the Desert Jet piece, for instance. I think the scale model aspect was something, again, that's important because of my interest in the size of things and the scale of things. For me, every single tree work that I've drawn or painted has been of this 1-to-1 scale. So I'd say all of my drawings have dealt with that in mind. In the sculpture, it was quite different. Making scale models was something that I think kind of came out of working as a set carpenter on films, and that experience made me think a lot about how something, that's how a belief or a thing can be constructed kind of right before one's eyes, and how that artifice somehow was could be quite engaging and even beguiling in a sense, and how really we're kind of inundated with that kind of imagery all the time. I was interested too in how that might cross over into how we understand political events even, and I think that seems to be an important thing even now, maybe especially now.
Well, politics is theater, politics is a film set.
Yeah.
I was going to say, surely there must be some relationship to photography, thinking of this cropping and whatnot. But when you talk about film sets, well, this is photography on the grand scale. It's cut off where the film isn't going to go.
Yeah,
But you have this highly theatricalized experience or realism within the frame of reference that the camera
Right,
is going
right.
to travel through. So, so this sense. Do you want to talk a little bit more about this question of the set as it relates to the work?
right, right. Well, I think, yeah, the set is a kind of very unreal experience, and it's especially like that when you're working on them. There's you know, you kind of go from, in my case, the carpentry shop to the floor, you know, carrying whatever onto the stage, and you know, you're very aware of the boundaries of this thing. So you know, you're moving from one world, that's the real world where you're actually making money and doing that, onto this completely you know, fictitious stage set where, and I think that there's a sort of, I've always been fascinated by that, you know, that movement between these two worlds, and there are boundaries there. So I suppose, you know, really when I look at something like, say, fragmentation, that's a good example of how you know, that fragmentation actually occurs in real life.
Politics. Politics seems to have run through, or a sense of politics seems to have run through your work, Rob. Would you agree with that?
I think, yes, it has, and one thing what I remember when I was first starting out was that sort of was that was the kiss of death. It doesn't seem to be that way now, but I think many artists just avoided any sort of political commentary in their work because, and I think probably the reason is, you know, an event can become dated very quickly, and the reference can become lost, and you know, you're also trying to make a work that can be seen many years from now. But I think sometimes those specific events are really worth looking at and recording, and somehow they also exist on a larger scale as well. I think politics becomes a real difficult thing in art too, because I sometimes think if it could really, you know, if making an artwork could really change the course of events, and you could actually do things that made the world a better place. I mean, I think it would be incumbent on artists to be there in their studios constantly working. that it you know, too much of, you know, that's simply not the case. It's really, you know, it's very difficult to change any kind of an event through an artwork, and I don't know that there are too many instances of that even. Often it seems to feel like when an artwork does have some sort of political content, it's there, and it's just simply being acknowledged rather than you know, having any effect beyond the small group of people who are viewing it. It's a kind of preaching to the choir situation, but at the same time, I think there's, you know, the things do perhaps move more slowly than we'd like to see them. There are so many things that maybe don't change the world. I mean, you know, it's a very difficult question.
Yeah, Little Boy, I want to pick up on that and come back to Little Boy, which I believe was back in the 1980s at some point, 1986.
Right.
Little Boy, of course, carries in its title a very political reference. Okay, maybe not everybody on the street knows Little Boy, but
Yeah.
it doesn't take too much to figure it out or find out. And somebody's going to whisper it in your ear, perhaps. But what I'm saying is that Little Boy may be political. It is indeed a political work, but it's also funny. You know, it's by the collapse of these two things, you get almost instantly comedy.
Right.
And comedy is one of the most most trenchant criticisms of any kind of situation that you want to upset. So I'm kind of curious, Rob, whether you feel that maybe Little Boy is a good example, maybe there are others as well, where yes, maybe one can't change the world, you know,
Right.
but by bringing comedy into the equation, or by bringing a jolt, like in Desert Jet, where suddenly you've got this backwards, behind the scenes and in front of the scene kind of thing, all that kind of stuff. Whether these kinds of interruptions, comedic or otherwise, serve the purpose of, I don't know, make people stop and think.
Well, Little Boy, you know, it's in the title. It's you know, right there. So that's the beginning of it, and there's this kind of sardonic humor in the naming of that bomb, which devastated 60,000 people died in one bombing, and 60,000 more were injured or maimed permanently. And I mean, I don't think there's been an event like that. To do something, 40, 50 years later, and look back is in a way kind of impossible, but I think that work did kind of try to bring in some aspect of the child into it, and the fascination with military hardware, or the view we've had of guns, or sleek ammunition, or whatever it is. There's a kind of portrayal of those pieces of equipment as desirable, and that carried. I think in many ways. I recently showed those works together, and it was really quite important. To put them together, because Little Boy was the precursor to Desert Jet, and I think the Desert Jet piece really maybe accomplished what I had wanted to do with Little Boy, and Little Boy was maybe a rough outline, if I can put it that way, of what 8 years later Desert Jet would really be. And I think Desert Jet looked on the very first war in Iraq and saw, as it was being portrayed on television, especially, as it was then called the sort of game, a kind of electronic game war. You know, it almost combined all the aspects, technology, war, bombs, all these things into a kind of palatable expression of you know, wartime as something that can be viewed on television. There's something sardonic and kind of upsetting about it all, but it's, you know, this is the way it's portrayed. How do you kind of observe that and then try to make sense of it and you know, make a, you know, it seemed important always to try to combat that, to try to fight against it.
As we talk, it occurs to me suddenly, something that hadn't occurred to me before, that there's a form of melancholy that moves through your practice. Not exactly a memento mori, but
Right.
a kind of melancholy. Do you want to talk about that?
That's, I'm not sure that's, well, I think I do see that in my work, and I think too I've tried to move away from those kind of ways that it might be, the work might be viewed in a kind of romantic way, and I've tried to steer it to a kind of realism. I'm not sure if this works, but it's how I've approached it, and I'm not even sure that I understand melancholy exactly. Maybe I'd agree that it's there, and maybe that's just, you know, something that is inescapable. But for me, I you know, I sort of look to things and, you know, or maybe see something, observe something that you know, I become engaged in, or you know, it strikes me somehow, and I follow that. I think that's maybe what, getting back to say what an artist does is I think you know, that being able to sort of look at something and follow it through is really part of that activity. It's maybe the most wonderful thing about it is that you know, an artist can engage themselves in something that maybe just those opportunities wouldn't be there for someone else, but it's kind of built into the very aspect of being an artist. I think is sort of being able to look at something and then follow it through, maybe even in the process become obsessed and give oneself over to it. I think, you know, I find myself following things that, you know, almost don't make any sense, but I somehow think that even, you know, I think I need to allow myself to just go with it and see where it takes me.
Not too much surprise, we all work within a context, a cultural context, a historical epoch, you might say even. What era are we in, actually? And if the question comes up, is there, as in the 60s, when there was a very clear sense of the context within which one was working, formally speaking, possibly in terms of what they call minimalism, intellectually speaking, perhaps in terms of
post-structuralism,
of a disruption of a tradition of metaphor and an attempt to become, in a sense, real or phenomenal.
Right.
When we think about the current era, at least the last 10, 15 years, maybe something like that. Do you have a sense for yourself, Rob, of how you understand this context that you're presumably working within? And to what extent you feel the work is either contributing to it or countering it?
Well, I think I've had this feeling for quite a while that we're in an era that really encompasses many different approaches. So we can't really frame our era in an ideological one or sort of a singular ideology. We're in a, you know, we're in a, you know, in an era where numerous approaches are going on at the same time, and I don't think there's a sort of feeling that one dominates. At least I don't have that feeling anyway. And I think even as perhaps I haven't been reading cultural theory so much because it perhaps can't answer the questions I'm looking for. So I'm not trying to find myself in a certain position. In other words, I'm not looking for that. I'm looking for information. So and that's maybe where I'm finding it is not so much in a theoretical area.
Last two more questions before we move. Well, part of the context in which we operate, of course, is the art system. And the art system may or may not have a relationship to the cultural context in which we're at. But as you say, if our context is pluralistic, to coin a phrase,
Right.
How do you see your relationship to the art system itself? To that is the galleries, the curators, the critics, the art historians, this whole panoply, the collectors, and the sheer politics of the art system. What kind of relationship do you have yourself to all this?
I think I'm fairly wary of all of it. It's I in many ways I'm suspicious. I guess that's probably part of how I grew up, and it's part of even my whole background. So I come at all of this more from a working class kind of position. I've not really had any kind of a teaching job or ever been engaged in any kind of professional way. I'd say I've always had other work that was some sort of probably skilled labor, but that's, I think, informed me, and it's actually informed much of my work as an artist too. So I think from that position, the art world itself is I think you want to perhaps not find yourself too engaged in it. That's, I'm speaking about, you know, how I feel about it. The other thing is I think there's a, you know, one could get trapped into trying to be an artist, you know, like it as if, you know, some sort of success could, you know, I don't know, lead to I'm just not sure just where all this goes. I think in many ways it's more important to keep one's eye on the work and on what one feels needs to be done. I think the art world has traps in it, and I'd say one of them would be, you know, thinking that there's a way to success. And in any other field, you would, you know, if you do see success, you tend to repeat it. In the art world, it's it can become a trap, and it can lead to, you know, that repetition can be you know, something that's inescapable. So I think one always has to be wary of these things and not buy into it, I guess, too much.
Rob, how can I put it? You talked a little bit ago about, what can I call it? I'm not quite sure the word you used, but a workman-like approach to being an artist. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, here we are in a shop.
Right.
The part of your studio that's a shop. And what occurs to me is that there's something appealingly accessible about taking that kind of position as an artist. I know nonsense, you know, workmanlike
right.
position. I'm wondering, does that carry over in your mind to how you would like the public to encounter the work?
I'm not sure. I can even say how it can be perceived, but I think the way I approach it is very similar to how I would make a bookcase or a piece of furniture or a staircase or whatever. It's you know, to me there's a beginning and a middle and an end. You know, I find anyway, I like to have an idea of what it is I'm working on before I start. That's just how I approach making something. Mm-hmm. And that's the same if I were to build a bookcase. I'd start with a drawing. So I think I try to foresee the work as much as I can, and then possibly it does kind of veer off somewhere, but I quite often have a fairly good idea of where I'm going right from the beginning.
And do you want the public to sort of see it through that sort of lens?
I don't know if I can direct how another person sees the work, but I think there's enough information in every piece I've done that indicates, I think, what it is. I don't generally try to make my works vague. I think there's specificity to them.
there's some there's something recognizable in the work, and I think if you're working with imagery, then that right away is I think indicates that there's a desire to communicate, and communication is definitely part of what I'm in the business of. So.
And the business actually is a complicated one. And I guess it's pretty well known, and probably the reason why there are relatively few artists in a given society is that it's mighty difficult to construct and maintain a career. You have. And I'm kind of curious how you persevered in this, Rob, and what your reflections on having a career and maintaining it, what reflections you have about that? How much perseverance it takes?
I think quite a bit, and there's, I think at some point it's you inevitably have to rely on no one but yourself, and there's just simply you just have to kind of will your way through it, because there are definite pitfalls and parts of a career that are become very hard to get through. Having said that, I'd say right now I'm at a point where I'm not really doing a lot of work, but I'm really looking at maybe I sort of see it as important to, at this stage anyway, to make work that's important to me and that I think I really feel is necessary. I'm not interested in just making work for the sake of making work, and if I make something, I want to make sure that it's worthwhile. It's it takes a lot of time for me to make any of the pieces I've ever made. They're huge time investments, and I sometimes think it's difficult even on my family, the other people around me. I mean, they've had to go through these periods where sometimes just financially there's it gets tough, but I've probably been very blessed to have people who are patient all around me. So, but yeah, I think it does happen as one gets older that I feel it anyway, that I like the idea of making work, but it's not going to happen unless I really know that that's what I want to make.
And of course we're in a shop that you use not just for the production of work, but also for other productions.
Right.
Clients that want work done, for
Right.
instance.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that, Rob?
Yeah, I think I've always taken a position that the carpentry is quite a different game altogether. It's I see it as I'm really trying to satisfy someone else's need and come up with a solution to a problem that they have. It's pretty pretty cut and dry that way. And I bring whatever I can to it, and if I can design something for them, then that's great. Often people just everyone is different, but I've had people practically, they often they'll send me a picture of something they want. I can try to reproduce it as best I can, or in other cases they almost give me free rein, and that's a little frightening, but that's where I need to know what the budget is. And so it's a different thing than making an artwork in that sense. And I've never really tried to even develop some sort of a furniture style or anything like that. I'm kind of fairly open to any way of really solving a problem, and that's where I see that part of my work is much more about problem solving. I find sculpture is kind of like that too. A lot of it is, just trying to come up with ways to make something work, like just putting things together that somehow make sense, or attaching something to something else, or whatever it is. Painting or drawing just seems like a quite different thing. It's and I sometimes feel mesmerized by that, by drawing or painting. It's so fluid and it's not something where you're thinking about every part necessarily. It kind of flows in a more unconscious way. And I remember when I first started doing these watercolors, how that it was kind of captivating. It was kind of like going back a little bit into childhood almost, and remembering how what that felt like to make drawings on paper, and I think that's also why I like paper. It's just a very flat, it's almost nothing. It's just a surface that seems almost like it has no pretensions about it. It's the simplest material I think that you can work on, and there's something quite freeing about it.
We live in a culture of social media at this point, certainly in the last 10, 15 years. And social media is advancing by leaps and bounds and becoming so much a part of our environment, Rob. I'm just kind of curious, to what extent does the internet, do the current communication technologies, social media, I guess, to name one would be, words escape me because I don't use them myself, but to what extent do these media, that there are so much about communication, to what extent do you use them, or do you find that they are helpful at all, or even relevant to your practice at this point?
Yeah, I still communicate mostly through email. So, but I like email just because it's just mail, so there's nothing to it. There's a kind of time waster aspect to all of it, and I'm pretty aware of that. I use Instagram, and I have at some times thought of actually using it a little more, because I have this interest in trees that I've planted, and that's kind of a part of maybe what I do as well. That isn't really, I don't see that as artwork, but it's important to what I'm doing right now, and I've become more and more interested in it, and I think it's one of those things that's just leading me along. I'm following. I have a tree sale that I do every year. I grow some trees from seed, others are trees I dig up. I have on the property I live on, there's part of it is reclaimed. Well, the largest part of it is a reclaimed gravel pit where I've planted and quite a few pine trees especially, but I also have a number of Carolinian trees and trees that are native to the area around Prince Edward County, I guess. But the tree sale is a thing that is kind of something that intrigues me a lot right now, and I've seen some of the trees I've sold. Maybe it's been going on for 10 years anyway, or maybe a little longer. Some of these trees are now fairly large. People show them to me, and you know, there's something about looking at a thing that grew like that and is continuing, and I'd say in a way that's been one of those things I was talking about before that kind of carries on and leads you along. I don't think, you know, if you allow yourself to get into it or to just allow it to take you, it might produce a result that's unexpected, and I think that's somehow I'm kind of thinking that might happen in this case. It's not a very lucrative thing, but it's nonetheless important, and I'm thinking that there's an attachment to possibly to social media, that it could become like I could actually I've been thinking anyway that maybe it's an Instagram site or something like that.
This last question. I never know how to phrase this one, so I'm going to give it a try. I think especially in this era, and a number of people have commented on it, that the lines between what we apprehend as somehow real and the arena that we either know is unreal, assume as unreal, or move effortlessly through it as though it were real. These two arenas seem to intersect with one another to a degree that perhaps is unusual in any other epoch. And social media, I think, is part of that. So we live in a world that we're never sure whether what around us is real or fantasy, fiction, some kind of digital manipulation, if you want. So the questions that have often been core to understanding what an artwork is, or what an artist is, for that matter. That is to say, the notion of an original experience, or a way of constructing something original, authentic, whatever the terms might be. This age-old expectation of what an artist does has become complicated by the sense that we don't live in a world in which there's anything that we can say, well, that's real, and this is not real, because they blend together so much. So I'm kind of curious about this kind of culture that we have, Rob, and as an artist, or as artists, how do we understand what we do as, in the old term, authentic, or in some other term, something somehow fundamental or real that we can recognize as significant, as something that moves us, I guess. In this climate, how does one move somebody?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're really asking what is art, and how does one make a work of art? and I think that's it. It's that landscape of these two intersecting worlds. I think in making art, I've sort of felt that artwork grounds me in a lot of ways, and not necessarily that looking at art or making art grounds me, but the process does. And I think it's much like going out and starting to grow trees from seed is like a crazy notion, but at the same time it's not. So it becomes something that seems like, to me anyway, it just makes a lot of sense, and it starts to sort of at certain times just take over my life, and I think it's important that it does. So it's not really where I was thinking I'd be going 20 years ago, but in a lot of ways that's good. It's that grounding too is really important, I think, in trying to understand where or how to live in a world that is quite confusing a lot of times, and it's well, I'm not sure what to say about it, but it's certainly been an important part of my life. I've been probably fortunate to have that always around me. It's been a good way to just observe the world through a lens that's informed by artwork. I think that's been a fantastic way to view it. Maybe a scientist would feel the same way. Maybe they would, like say a botanist would look at any event and could sort of say, well, there's something about, plants or this or the roots or whatever, any certain thing, or any even a general thing could maybe be applied that way. But for me, I mean, the artwork has been a way to find out a lot about the world.